So I want to do this quick differentiator podcast between INFP and INTP. Because I have had times in my life, particularly maybe in the last few years, where I've had moments where I'm like, am I actually an INFP? Because I've been going through a lot more emotional work and trying to figure out some of my past and some of those relationships to my emotions and my past experience, and learning how to access my emotions more. It's probably simply the fact that it's taken me 36 years to start to really fully investigate my emotional experience that it probably says that I am not an INFP. But I think there are some important points to bring up to talk about some of the differences between an INFP and an INTP. Now, this is going to be an overview. This is not something where I'm going to go into such intense depth, but I do cover some of this in the Are You Really an INTP course on happychemicals.org. It's a free course, and I go through the cognitive functions of an INTP as well as the other 4 functions to make some comparisons and talk about whether or not that's something that fits within you. So I know this is a popular ask, and there are a couple different types that are a popular ask to make some comparisons to. So I'll share some quick notes about what my experience is and what I feel some of the differences are. For what's important, I think, to start with is that INFP and INTP are, there's like a kinship between the two types, because the NP aspect, the intuitive perceiver aspect, is a common ground, first of all. So there's a resonance with the type of playfulness and a resonance with the type of sense of humor. There's a bit of a dry sense of humor for an INTP, and it's still kind of a dry sense of humor for an INFP, because they're both kind of pulling or making fun of that tertiary introverted sensing function, but are probably going to use different language and speak about their experience in slightly different ways. Primarily, the INTP is going to use more logic-based connective language, not something that's going to be, I don't know how else to put it, than it's going to be more, I wouldn't say academic, but not as emotional. Emotional is such a vague word. What I'm trying to say is that an INFP may not necessarily use language that quote-unquote makes sense, but they'll use language that evokes what their feeling is or what their intention is or what they're trying to express. So they may use like powerful words or expressive words, even if it's not necessarily the right word for the quote-unquote definition of the word. But it's sort of almost how the word sounds or what it evokes, or the intention that it casts. Something that I think is important is that Dario Nardi, he does brain scan work, and while there isn't necessarily like an introverted thinking spot in the brain or an introverted feeling spot in the brain necessarily, one of the things that he looks for when trying to suss out introverted feeling versus some other function is on the right side of the brain, there is sort of a voice tone and intention section, and a part that is sort of figuring out how you feel about a situation. So it's going to be typically more on the right side of the brain, and voice tone and intention is very important. Like introverted feelers get into more of a flow state when they're listening, whereas introverted thinking can get more into a flow state when they're explaining. And so there's this kinship between introverted thinking and introverted feeling, in that they're sort of doing the spelunking of their process in a very similar way. I'm stringing together a mosaic of thoughts and data points and ideas. Introverted feeling is stringing together a mosaic of emotions and experiences and intentions and motivations and different people, because they not necessarily get to know people for what they present on the surface, but get to know people for what they've expressed about themselves. And so there's a desire for a variety of emotional experiences and to add to their mosaic of things that they're figuring out for themselves. So introverted thinking is trying to figure out theories, conceptualizations of ideas. Introverted feeling is trying to figure out more of what are aspects of their own identity that they relate to on a fuller experience, and then being able to utilize that to connect to more of a deeper ego essence of who they are. And so it's tricky to talk about because introverted feeling is not something that's really easy to express and conceptualize. But introverted feeling largely it's not just feelings. It's not just like how I feel, right? Like you could really easily look, like one of the questions could be like, why is it hard to figure out if you're an INTP versus an INFP? Aren't INFPs crying all the time and INTPs are stoic and just staring all the time? Like, no, that's not even remotely true. Those are stereotypes. Those are very rarely ever actually seen in the wild. When you're experiencing people, they have a breadth of life experience. They have all sorts of different aspects that mold into our personality. So you've got career considerations, you've got upbringing, you've got location, you've got all sorts of circumstances that define someone's experience. Introverted feeling or introverted thinking is simply the mechanisms to which these two types make different decisions. So these decision-making processes are simply more based on logic and data versus the intent, voice tone, motivation, and what my needs are, my feelings are, what my interpretation of my feelings, because that introverted process is an interpretation. It's my personal interpretation of what I think or what I feel, right? Even though the desire may be some version of objectivity for INTPs, it's still my perspective, what data I have gathered, not necessarily the objective data necessarily, because both types can miss a lot, right? Both types, IPs in general, can very much overvalue seriousness of their experience, right? Both types can get very in-depth about their thinking or feeling process and overvalue their perspective as the perspective. That's why that extroverted intuition is a place for expansion, to see that like, oh, I'm not always right all the time. This is more of a flex flow than it is about me just enforcing my perspective on the world. Because like introverted thinking and introverted feeling can both be assholes. And, I very much have been an asshole in my own introverted thinking way by dismissing someone's emotional experience or disrupting the emotional tone of a room by interjecting the data of what I see of the situation. And introverted feeling can be disruptive in that way too. Like introverted feeling can pull all of the attention in a room towards themselves, disrupt an FE vibe in that sort of way. Or see a TE system and find out that it's not serving everybody or not serving more and more emotional experiences or motivations or possibilities, and or overvalue their own experience and then be disruptive to a TE system as well. So that in a sense is like the purpose for each type in a way, as part of the ecosystem of personality types and experiences and all that fun stuff. But largely, one of the main challenges I think in differentiation is also gender or sexual energy. So gender being like, if you were raised male and given all of those male stereotypes, depending on location and stuff too. It's not just in America. That's a particular type of gender raising, I guess you could say. I don't know what the word is. And then for an INFP, if you're an INFP male, you could also take in some of those aspects of trying to balance what it means to be a masculine version of an INFP, which could mean fitting in some sense to unconsciously into like what the look and feel of what it means to be a man, right? Like you can be an INFP male and still very much look or sound or create an experience of being, the typical masculine male. Same for females. Like for an INTP female, there can be an advantage for an INTP female who has a socialization advantage. And sometimes disadvantage, like I'm not saying that's the case, but let's say if you're an attractive INTP female and you fit into what's expected of sort of the FE clique, then you may have more access to emotional data than an INTP male might, because INTP males may be more one-sided in the TI masculine sense and remove themselves from an FE situation, and they might not necessarily have as much experience with emotional data, whereas an INTP female may have more experience with emotional data. So it's sort of a challenge across the board to figure out which is which, but ultimately there's a lot to consider, and I know there's no satisfying answer here other than it's complicated and something that I think is important for you to consider within yourself. Now, if you're an INTP like me who has been doing emotional work at some point in your life, don't confuse that for an introverted feeling process necessarily. You may have to do some mirroring or expressing or talking on voice notes or going to a therapist and expressing how you feel, and then you're starting to learn how you feel through expressing your feelings out loud, that you're doing more of an extroverted feeling process. Whereas introverted feeling is not necessarily always going to give how they feel away. If anything, they typically won't. That's why you get a lot of introverted feeling expressions either in private one-on-one or in not necessarily group situations, or in writing, poetry, famous novels and works, that music involves a lot of introverted feeling expression. Because words are more of a TI playground, FI is more esoteric than that. And it is words, it is listening to someone, but when they're listening to someone, they're not necessarily listening for the words that they're saying. Introverted thinking is listening for the words, because introverted thinking is looking for inconsistencies in someone's logic. Introverted feeling is listening for someone's voice tone and intention and the nuances of that. Whether someone's being authentic, whether someone is, whether what they're saying and what they're doing or what they're, the way that they're expressing matches up, right? Introverted feeling and extroverted feeling can kind of butt heads in kind of thinking that each other is fake, right? Because extroverted feeling is sort of pulling up an emotion in real time to create an experience or to get a need met, where introverted feeling is like trying to honor what my authentic experience is at any given moment. And so introverted feeling may see extroverted feeling as inauthentic, and extroverted feeling may see introverted feeling as selfish or emotionally greedy and messing up the vibe of the situation. And now extroverted feeling is valuable, and it may simply be that an INTP is getting to know their extroverted feeling process a little bit more, and that may start to gear you towards thinking that you're an introverted feeling person. Like, am I an INFP or an INTP? And that can be confusing, because an INTP, which is usually my crowd, is constantly questioning ourselves. There's very rarely a certainty unless it goes into our introverted sensing process and is something that we just kind of pull up on every time. There needs to be enough consistency for us to believe something. And if there's inconsistency in our experience related to our understanding of what it means to be an INTP, it may simply mean that you need to learn more about the nuances of what it means to be an INTP. Like I said from the outset, if your assumption is that an INTP is going to be cold and stoic and non-feeling, and you have feelings, then you're going to be like, oh, actually, I'm an INFP. Or if you're an INFP, that is not necessarily, that is sort of focused on your aspirations of maybe some extroverted thinking aspirations. And maybe you're a programmer and maybe you're doing some of that work, because it's totally possible. Or you're setting up systems through maybe teaching or something like that. You can totally convince yourself that, especially if you have a more masculine bent in being an INFP, that maybe you're actually an INTP, right? And so there's really the end point here is that there are multiple considerations. It's nuanced. It takes time to figure out. It's not easy. And the reason that I did this more of a podcast style versus the INTP and INTJ one, for example, where I kind of broke it up into sections, is because I wanted you to hear how confusing this can be, or how difficult it is, or how challenging it is. This is not an easy process to figure out your type for sure, and it shouldn't be. I don't want it to be. Like, it's if you're questioning whether or not you're an INTP or an INFP, that's probably a good thing, right? It's not, you don't need to necessarily stay in a state of confusion, but ask yourself what it is that you're trying to figure out. Are you trying to figure out whether or not my feelings are introverted or extroverted? Like, that might be part of the differentiator, not just the 4-letter code, but again, whether or not am I using introverted thinking or extroverted thinking? In which position? What does that look like? And I think that's really helpful for you to start to suss out. And that's some of the stuff I get into in the Are You Really an INTP program that's free on our website at happychemicals.org. And then when you figure out you're an INTP, I've got all sorts of programs for INTPs specifically to help with personal growth and all that stuff. So, my intention here, to be blunt, is to kind of check off this box, because it's something that's been open for a while that I've wanted to do, and I know it's been a requested thing. I don't typically cover type informationally. I don't always like to do that, so I try to share more of what my experience is, because what I do on this channel is try to be more of a mirror to the INTP experience to help you grow in terms of your personal growth. So it's sort of an extroverted feeling thing. While you're listening to me, you're like nodding and you're like, yeah, you know what? I relate to that experience. I feel that, right? Whereas an introverted feeling person may be taking in my what I'm expressing here, or may be turned off by it because there's not a lot of emotional nuance in what I'm expressing right now. And that's what introverted feeling is looking for, some emotional nuance. So with all of that said, hopefully this is helpful. If you have more specific questions, please leave it in the comments below. On YouTube, they just activated the super thanks feature for me. So if you want to leave some support, that'd be amazing. You can click the heart button that has like a $sign in it. You can leave a $2, $5 donation. Helps to keep me doing this sort of thing. And there's also some like powers that unlock that you can leave a top comment, and I will see that one first, especially if you have questions about more nuances around this. I'm kind of just putting out a general feeler because I feel like this is a topic that can use more nuance, but I need more specific questions as to like what you might want to know about it, if that makes sense. So, because I'm not a type teacher necessarily, but I know that it's helpful for your growth as an INTP if you know if you are trying to grow extroverted feeling or introverted feeling, or introverted thinking or extroverted thinking, and kind of gives you a point to hone in on. Anyway, I gotta go do stuff. I appreciate you. happychemicals.org. We have a email list there as well, with a secret podcast that is all about exploring the inner cosmos and getting into the world of introspection in a helpful, positive, personal growth kind of way, and all of that stuff. And that's it for now. Like, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff, and I'll catch you next time on Dopamine and Other Happy Chemicals. See ya.